This episode of the Fiction Writers Podcast is brought to you by How to Write a Novel That Sells. Do you dream of writing a best-selling fiction novel? With the right tools, you could get there sooner than you think. Visit www.howtowriteanovelthatsells.com and unlock the secrets to writing compelling fiction taught by international best-selling author Lana McAra. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
Marketing. It's every author's favorite thing to do. My name is Lana McAra. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast. Tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Today, I am excited and delighted to welcome Raj Lulla to the podcast. Raj is an Indian-American author, podcaster, and marketer from Omaha, Nebraska, where he lives with his wife and 3 children. Welcome, Raj.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. We met through an introduction. A mutual friend introduced us, as I recall.
Yeah. Yep.
And one of the things that fascinated me about you is your background in marketing.
Yeah.
And so why do authors hate marketing?
Well, first of all, the skill set that we use for marketing in some ways feels completely opposite from writing a book. Writing a book is something we do often to make sense of the world. So we take a lot of input in our own experiences, our feelings, what we see going on in the world, and we congeal that down to a story. And so then going the opposite direction in marketing, saying, oh, okay, I've got this thing. Now I've got to figure out where it fits in the world. And then we also get into this, we go from an activity that's very solo, writing usually by yourself with a laptop or a notebook, into something that now requires us to get in front of a lot of people because we want to sell a lot of books. And for a lot of us, that raises the insecurities of, how do I get the world to like me? And, many of us started writing because we were quieter or we were kind of off on our own and kind of observing rather than trying to get everybody's attention. So it feels very unnatural to us. I think that's why people hate it so much.
Yes, I think most writers are at some level introverted because they want to be alone so they can write. Yeah.
I would say it's probably a big overlap there.
Yeah, absolutely. I hated it at the beginning. So I just want everybody to know, my first book, I really hated marketing because it felt so bad to me to be promoting myself out in the world.
Yeah, we have this kind of myth, I think, that the works that become great, that become, the icons of industry, that they did it simply because they were great. And it's like, I think we have this romantic idea that one person will read my book and they'll tell 2 people, and then those 2 people will tell 2 people, and soon you've sold 1 million copies or more. Unfortunately, that tends not to be true. You have very famous examples through history of even some of the great painters who I think it was Van Gogh's whose brother was an art dealer. And so it's like, we sort of, don't get me wrong, Van Gogh's genius is obvious, but it also helps that there was somebody very close to him who knew how to sell. And so that's what it kind of helps us break that myth a little bit of remembering that, Great Gatsby is one of my favorite examples of this not being true, because Great Gatsby was a relatively unknown book. And the reason why it became so huge was because it happened to be around the time of, I believe, World War II, and the book hadn't sold very well. So there was a whole warehouse full of copies of this book. And so the U.S. government came to F. Scott Fitzgerald and said, hey, we'll only pay cost for these books. You're not going to make any money on this, but we need stuff to send to the troops overseas to keep morale up, to keep them engaged, all those kinds of things. So the government offloaded this warehouse full of books from them, sent them all the GIs. You have all these people who came back and knew about the book, but it was, and that in a sense, that's, marketing, right? It's him being willing to take a loss on, or not a loss exactly, but certainly a profitability loss on all of those copies in order to just get the book out there. And then of course it becomes the juggernaut that we know today. But it wasn't just because of the quality of the book. Love the book. It's amazing, but it kind of busts the myth that if you just make something great, it will find its audience by itself without any activity on your part.
I love that you brought that up, because I have seen so many authors with great talent who have not done well, and they're the ones complaining because they know their stuff is good, but they just haven't hit the market. And one of the things that happened, I was just at an event about 2-3 weeks ago, the Sunshine State Book Festival, 200 book authors, 200 tables, unbelievable place. And everybody was, well, I think probably 90%. So there might have been 20 authors in there who actually sold some books that day, but most people did not sell any books.
Yeah.
The competition was fierce, right? 200 authors. But there was one person there who said, I usually sell 100 books at every book table.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not selling many today because of the competition. I don't usually come to these things. But I usually sell 100 books. And immediately I perked up because somebody knows how to sell, not just write. Yes. And we all know, we watched movies and read books before and went, how did this ever get published? How did that movie ever get made? And no.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Somebody did a good sell job on that thing.
Yeah. Well, I first started noticing this. So I spent the first 10 years of my career in nonprofit, and then I started transitioning to creative work. And so there's this period of time in my resume where I was a wedding photographer. And the things that I noticed as a wedding photographer, number one was that there were photographers who were massively better than me, who were working at Starbucks to try to keep their photography gig going on the side. And that's because they were bad at selling and marketing. They were not good at the business side of it, but they were better craftspeople than me. The other thing that I noticed was that there were people who were far worse photographers than me, objectively, worse composition, worse lighting, all those kinds of things, who were making far more money than me. And so, it's exactly to your point. We look at these things and you look at a photographer, you go, how is this person driving that car? How are they doing, and absent, a sugar daddy or whatever, it's just because of marketing and sales, and it does not have necessarily a direct relationship to the quality of the work.
Right. Exactly. So you have to believe in your own work enough to get out there and do what you need to do. So let's talk about that. Does that mean you have to become a famous influencer, on social media, Instagram, TikTok, all this stuff? Do you have to get out there and do that?
No, it absolutely doesn't. Now, if that's an approach that you're comfortable with, great. And if you know how to do it, that's really great. Obviously, kind of the more your name is out there, the more your presence is out there, then it's going to help with book sales. But I don't think that should be a requirement for you selling books. For most people, it's not. If you think of some of the most successful writers that one of my favorites is Aaron Sorkin, has absolutely zero social presence. Now, does it help that he wrote A Few Good Men directly after graduating college? 100%. Good for him. But more importantly, there are ways to sell that look a lot more behind the scenes, that have different tactics to them, that don't require you to be Instagram or TikTok famous.
So give us a few examples of ways that you could actually sell books without having to do that.
Yeah. So from my own life, my book is called The Caring House. It's about two people who met in grief counseling as children, and it's based on a real life grief support center for children that's in Salt Lake City. Unfortunately, about 60% of the kids there have lost a father, and tragically, many of those kids have lost their dad to suicide. And so I was listening to an episode of This American Life about this place, and I just got hit with this story idea. Man, what if a little boy and a little girl met in these circumstances? They grew up, fell in love, and got married. Could a marriage survive the suspicion every day of, am I going to lose this person today? And for me, it was kind of a way of dealing with my own questions of, I'd lost friends in their 30s who had kids. I had kids and all the pressures of life like that. But then also just, marriage in general, and just trusting another person with your heart, and just all of the things that life throws at you. And so when I finished the book, I started querying agents, as many people do, and I found the industry to be kind of oppressive, to be honest. It was, people who say, if we don't get back to you in 6 months, then assume that we've passed. And it's like, man, I don't let anybody treat me like that. It's like, my rule in my business is that I try to respond to your email within 1 business day. And don't get me wrong, I get why the systems are the way they are. They're overwhelmed. There are many systematic things wrong with the industry that are archaic and are not keeping up with the times. But the point is that I found the industry to be intractable. I was talking to a self-published author, and she told me that basically if you get to about 1,000 sales on Amazon, then you'll start to get picked up into the algorithm. The book will sort of sell itself after that. And so for me, I kind of just stuck that as the anchor point of, how could I sell 1,000 books? Well, I own a creative agency. I've seen enough Facebook ads. I've seen enough Amazon ads that I thought, well, I could try to figure this out. But the problem I had with that is, for one, it's cash outlay for me. And I'm not pulling it out of my business, and, we're not independently wealthy as a family. And so that's a big risk to take on. Do I want to spend, $10,000 to try to sell 1,000 books? That is scary to me. It's just not something that I was willing to do. But the other thing I really didn't like about that strategy is, like, why should Zuckerberg and Bezos get more rich off of, this thing that I created? And so I came up with this strategy where I reached out to the director of the nonprofit that this book is based on. And I said, hey, could we work together, and I will donate all of the royalties of every book that's pre-ordered to this place called the Sharing Place. And so that way, instead of giving money into Zuckerberg and Bezos, these kids who have lost a loved one, who've gone through the worst imaginable thing, will be supported. And hopefully we will also get to a number of books that makes this a sustainable effort. And so, it's both the right thing for the book, and it's the right thing for this nonprofit that, I just want to support these kids. They inspired this book, and I want to give back to this. I'd much rather do that than line some billionaire's pocket. That's just one idea of how you can, instead of, making reels until you're blue in the face, or, being awkward and dancing on TikTok, you can get scrappy and say, hey, what are the natural places where this book may find affinity? And going straight to the source in this case of, what about the people who were most likely to resonate with this story because they've lived a similar experience? Now, I will say, I don't even necessarily think that the parents of the kids at this place are the right audience for this book. Maybe this book is too raw and too real for them. But who may be the right people for them are their friends and family who go, hey, I know you don't understand what I just went through. This book actually captures it really well, and it's going to go to support people like my kid. That is a really natural thing. And now you're talking about networks that are much larger than my own personal group of family and friends.
Yes, absolutely. And then all the supporters of the nonprofit and their friends and family. And that is amazing. I love that idea. I've heard that before, but not recently. So thank you for bringing that up. That's something that I have not even thought of in my own promotion. I was looking up book clubs the other day, and there are some pretty narrow topic book clubs that could possibly want multiple copies. And so we're talking about multiple copies here. How do you sell multiple copies of fiction?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So that involves a hook.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about a hook.
Yeah. So, in my creative agency part of my world, I'm a story brand certified guide, and we're a story brand certified agency, one of about 40 in the world. And it's okay if you're not familiar with that. It's a great book. It's called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. But the premise of the book is that you can use the 7 elements of the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. It's used in Star Wars and Harry Potter and all of that to position your customer as the hero of the story and to position yourself as a guide to their success. And so, that can be a difficult thing because sometimes I see it on threads all the time, people complaining about, oh, writing a blurb is the worst part. And I'll say I had the same problem too. But with the hook, if we take that idea of our customer is the hero of the story and we're a guide to their success, then we start to ask the question, what is this book for? Not what is this book about, but what is this book for? And, just like I told you a couple of minutes ago, for me, writing this book was about going through this kind of second coming of age in life where, been married for a little while, had kids, started to experience loss in my life. I had a friend, I think she was 38, had 3 kids, went to sleep one night, didn't wake up the next day. Had another friend about a month or 2 later who he had cancer before college. I met him in college, and that was obviously a big part of his story when I met him. And unfortunately, about 15 years later, the cancer returns, and he passed away this time. And he had a couple of kids as well. And so I'm looking at my kids. I started writing my book right around the same time that my third kid, my son, was born, and I'm going, man, what if, I was gone in an instant. And so this story from This American Life, it hit me in such a profound way because, these kids, the sharing place that my book is based on, they have broken with the traditional idea that kids don't grieve because they don't understand it. And so they say, no, kids do grieve. We need to help them understand it. And so these kids, they teach them things like if somebody dies of liver disease, for example, it's like, well, your liver is like the vacuum cleaner for your blood, and it removes the dirty parts of your blood. And if your vacuum cleaner breaks, then the whole body gets filled with dirt and it stops working. And, so simplistic explanations like that, but are on the level that a kid can understand. And so, just imagining my own children or my friends' children having to work through this same process and being just absolutely heart-rended by this. Then write the book for 5 more years after that. And then I go to start marketing. I go, okay, how do I talk about what this book is for? Well, I can tell you exactly the picture of a successful reading of this book. I would love if somebody would pick this book up in an airport bookstore. In fact, I took a picture of the Tattered Cover airport bookstore in Denver because I'd been to Tattered Cover in downtown Denver, and it's a beautiful bookstore. And so it's not quite the generic, Hudson, bookstores or whatever you see in airports, but this one's a little bit nicer. And I was sitting on a bench, I could picture somebody picking up my book there. They're going off on a business trip away from their family. They probably had, something crazy going on as they were leaving. They had, the kids kind of pawing at them, mom, dad, don't go, whatever. There's one screaming, full diaper, the dog's barking for some unknown reason or getting in the trash. And so this person kind of leaves with this like, oh, it's good to be out of there. And then and then they pick up this book because it's got a pretty cover or something that appeals to them. And then they go sit in the hotel room. There's a conference going on during the day. They don't really feel like watching same old Netflix stuff at night. So they crack open this book. And I want this person to be, like you talked about, an unputdownable book. I want them to not be able to put down this book. And I want them to be in tears before they come home. And then I want them to get home and hug the heck out of their kids. That's what this book is for. And so then when we talk about a hook, then we say, okay, how do we write something that the book is about, that talks about what the book is for? And so for me, when I describe this book, it's really about their marriage, right? So it's a young boy and a girl, meet and grief counseling as children. They grow up, they fall in love and get married. I get there very fast. Obviously this is like 20 years of their life that encompasses. But in terms of the story, it's very important to just get through that. They start married in this book. So we got to get there really fast. But we also have to explain their origin, because that tells the stakes of this, of this conflict that's about to happen. So they grow up, fall in love, and get married. A sudden loss causes the husband, Gabe, to spiral. And that leaves Jenny wondering, his wife, Jenny, wondering if their marriage can make it. That's a hook. Now, because now we're all sitting there on some level, all of us wonder, can my marriage make it? And especially when you left, the dog was barking, the kid had a full diaper, and there was, it was a little tense on the way out the door. And then we have these moments where we're away from our families, especially on things like a business trip, where we go, do I go out with the coworkers and drink? Do I maybe give in to that flirtation that's happening at the office? Or do I go back and read a book that makes me love my family again, or love them more? That's what this book is for. And we tell it in little bits, and we all know that the story is way more important, or way more effective at producing change in people's lives than if I were to just write a book about marriage. And so we say, okay, can marriages go through the hardest things? And so part of the reason the story is set in such a difficult circumstance is because if these characters can make it, then we can all make it. And if they can't, then it kind of just confirms the bleak suspicion that we had about life anyway, that this maybe is just too hard. I'm not going to give away the ending, but I think you can even guess a little bit the perspective that I take on this. That can two characters who started in the hardest place and had the deck stacked against them, can their marriage make it? And if theirs can, maybe ours can.
Yes, and you're talking, I'm just getting so many different things are coming to my mind. Just let's unpack just a little bit the various topics that you could talk about on a podcast about your book. So you could talk about the marriage thing you just mentioned. What are some other topics that you could bring in from different angles?
Yeah. So, mental health is kind of an obvious one. Again, unfortunately, the characters of the book have lost a parent to suicide. And that's something that has impacted my life. I had a friend who attempted and thankfully, did not complete the act, but it really impacted my life from, late high school through all of college, really. And that impacted things like my relationship with my faith, because, we go into these churches and see people who all seem to have it together, but then underneath that, there's, sometimes some desperation. And, so wanting to, mental health, being able to talk about those things, as I just brought up, faith and kind of the way that our journeys and those types of things in life mature. For me, just the act of writing the book was kind of a departure from the community that I grew up in. There's some bad language in the book. In fact, that was one of the questions that my mom asked me. She was trying to decide if she was going to buy my book. And I told my mom, honestly, I was like, it may not be for you. You should buy it anyway, because you're supporting me, but I won't be offended if you don't love the book. And she asked me very gently, she was like, did the bad words have to be in there? I was like, I think it's realistic for the situations that these people are in. So yes, I would say so. It doesn't seem gratuitous. But I grew up in a very, conservative, very kind of brute environment where those types of things wouldn't be acceptable. Even talking about some of these mental issues wouldn't be acceptable. The book is set in Salt Lake City, and there's obviously a very strong religious culture there. There's times where I get a little sensitive about, will people feel like this book is bashing that religious culture? But, people who know me know that it part of it is just struggling with my own upbringing and trying to figure out my own way, which is, again, another part of that second coming of age. So that's another avenue. For myself, being diagnosed ADHD later in life, and learning about highly sensitive personality, those types of things. Those are other great podcast topics and episodes that I can be out there for as well.
Yes, yes. I love what you said about what the book is for rather than what it's about. Because when I was at that event and listening to all these authors pitching their books, I was walking around handing out cards for my podcast. I didn't have any table in. They were all telling me what the book was about, not what it was for. So that's a really strong point. The topic of grief and loss is another one that I heard. And so just to kind of expand on that a little bit, when I am on a podcast, I have a list of topics, and they're a range. They're a range of topics. So I want to hit as many notes as I can with different people coming from my own story that matches into what the book is saying. And then I can speak to it. And even, your example of a friend who went through that and it made an impact on you. Those are all great ways to get your fiction out there and talk about your fiction, not in the delineation of the events of the story. Yeah. That's not what you talk about. You talk about the topics, how those topics affected you and what brought them in to the book in the first place, because it meant something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People will bring.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, people will bring in their own ideas of what they think the book should be. Like if you give them a setting like mine, I was really afraid for a long time to talk about what the hook or the idea of my book was, because I didn't yet know what it was for. And so I always just worried like, oh, well, I mean, anybody could have listened to that episode of This American Life. They all could have had the same idea. I got to hurry and get this thing to market because, somebody else will write the same book. What I didn't realize is that there were so many specific things about my experience. One of those being that, unfortunately, the year that my wife and I got married, we lost her sister to an overdose, and she left behind a 3-year-old, and so the beginning of our marriage was just defined by this, just really heavy grief. When you lose somebody quickly and young like that, it's so much heavier sometimes than like a longer drawn out illness or something like that. And so that's an element that nobody else is bringing to this story. And so you both don't have to worry about somebody else writing the same story, but then that's also why we surface these things, because we give people an expectation of where they're going to go in the book, because we've all, even if it's just, losing a pet or losing a job, we all go through these things in adult life where we go, is this really how the whole thing is going to be? Because this hurts. And I don't know if I'm going to make it through all this. People will start to bring their own experiences, but they'll connect with yours, which is part of why it doesn't matter if you're Instagram or TikTok famous, because if you need to talk about that in a longer form, like a blog or a podcast interview or an email list where you get to open up a little bit more, those are great other avenues that you could take.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I teach my students is to look for opportunities to embed those kind of things into the book, which you did it. You did it beautifully, so that you have those talking points when you come to market your book, things that are meaningful to you, so that you get animated and excited about talking about the topic when you are in an interview like we're in right now. So let's talk a little bit about the indie publishing and hybrid and all that conversation, which has been going on for a while now. What's your take on it?
Yeah. For me, I really wanted to be traditionally published. It was kind of a disappointment to me when I realized that I was not going to be able to get to market fast enough on that. My understanding of how the traditional market works is that you have to query agents. The agents then, after they have you work on your book a little bit, then they will, take it to editors that they have relationships with, and then try to sell you your book. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. If it does happen, overall, you're talking 2 to 3 years probably from the time that you get an agent to the time that your book actually comes out in bookstores. My book is already set about 10 years ago, which is kind of stretching the boundaries of what could be considered contemporary fiction. It's set in a time period that's set for a very specific reason in the book. Um, but so I knew that like the clock was kind of working against me a little bit, and I wanted to get to market a little bit faster. But I did try. I tried querying. Like I said, I found the industry to be a little bit intractable. Not to mention, too, at the time that I was querying, I think that people were not overly receptive to a book that was about heavy topics. I think that the industry tends to be somewhat reactive because, it's like we had just come out of COVID and they're like, we don't, we want more Ted Lasso, less, I don't even know what else would be the opposite of it. But the funny thing is that even in the midst of that, there's this show Shrinking that came out that was about, a therapist who lost his wife. And I was like, oh, good. If I can just find an agent who's looking for this. And I found an agent who was like, I want the next Shrinking. And so I queried her, nothing, heard absolutely nothing back from this agent. I was like, there is never going to be a closer book to that show. And there's never going to be a closer agent to that desire than this moment. And so the whole thing was very, very frustrating. I think now I would have a better skill set to know what I'm going after if I were to query agents on my next book. But ultimately, what I learned in that whole process is that the traditional publishing will provide two major things, maybe a third. The marketing and distribution are the two big things. The third littler thing is just design and kind of production value for your book. Well, I own a creative agency, as we talked about, so design and production value. Thankfully, I have a business partner who's amazing at those things. Didn't need to worry about those sides of things. Marketing, I'm quite familiar with. And not to mention a lot of debut authors, and especially in fiction, especially in, upmarket or literary fiction, are not going to get a ton of marketing dollars or attention from a company. And so that just leaves distribution. Well, Amazon does, it depends on what stats you look at, but I've heard between 80 and 86% of the distribution of books in this country anyway. And so it's like, even if it's lower than that, even 70%, it's like you've got most of the market available in one spot anyway. Do I want the experience where my dad rolls up to Barnes & Noble, gets to buy my book off the shelf? Absolutely. But there are other avenues to doing that. I'm already exploring those. So getting in as a local author with them, or there's also, some services, I think it's Ingram or some others in the industry that can get you into traditional bookstores as well. And so I think the model is changing quite a bit. I had there was a writing consultant who told me that the book industry is changing in the same way that the movie industry and the music industry changed. They just don't know it yet. And I think that that's true. I think one really obvious reason why that's true is I don't understand for the life of me why you can't walk into a Barnes & Noble and buy a book and also get the digital copy at the same time. I will pay $5 more for every copy of that book. But they're just, it's like this completely siloed industry where, digital and audio are thought of as somehow different products. And I don't know about you, Lana, but when I read a book, I'll also maybe pick up the audio copy from the library so I can drive and listen to the book, especially if I'm really into it. But I'd love to have a digital copy of the book as well, where I can make digital notes, or if I read something that was really memorable, or I heard it in the car, then I can go back and search it, because everybody hates the experience of going, oh my gosh, there's this great quote in this book. And then you're like, I thought it was on page, roughly around page 200, and it's not there. And so you're like, I'm not going to read the whole book. So you kind of close it in frustration, shove it back on the shelf, and it collects dust for the rest of your life. Why can't the industry come alongside us and modernize alongside us. We're starting to see that. I've heard rumors, I don't know if they're true, but I've heard rumors that you are starting to see the major publishers use Amazon as a testing ground and see authors that are gaining ground there and then making offers after the fact. They say they don't, like if you ask any industry professional, they say they absolutely don't. If they're not doing it, it's honestly kind of stupid. It's like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you see which authors have the most drive, the most market receptivity, and then go, why don't we just pick this book up? And I don't know if this part is true, but I worked at Barnes & Noble when 50 Shades of Grey came out. And what I do know about that time is that it was either on such a small press that it was barely in our system, or it was indie published before it became traditionally published. And so even though the industry will tell you that they don't pick up books that were indie published, turns out if Oprah talks about a book, then they will figure it out in a hurry how to get massive distribution behind a book that shows a lot of promise for the industry. That's, so anyway, obviously you can tell where I landed. I decided to go indie myself because I wanted to have more control over how I did this. I would not be able to do the partnership with the sharing place that I'm doing if it were up to a publisher, because they get to decide. They're not going to want me to give away most of the royalties. And even if I gave away my portion of the royalties, it'd be such a small amount. It would take me forever to get to my $10,000 goal.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I am traditionally published. My first 25 books were traditionally published. And everything you said is absolutely on point, which is why I have stepped away from traditional publishing. It just is not worth it. Not only do you get such a small amount, 8% sometimes. I had a book in Walmart. I was making 35 cents a copy on that book in Walmart. It sold 250,000 copies, but I got a pitiful amount of money from that book. So the hybrid model, where you pay them some money at the front, but they market it and they distribute it like they are a traditional publisher, that works for some people. But again, you have to wait to be accepted. It's an accepting thing. You don't just go and pay the money to print the book. No, you've got to wait for a proposal to be accepted and so forth. So I'm really excited at what is happening in the world of books, because we are actually claiming our power as authors. And I know several authors who have decided to go indie for exactly the same reason, because they know how to market books. They know how to sell books. They get out there. They're good with it. They don't have to have that internal struggle, about marketing. And so they're doing great. They're doing great.
And I would say too, I know people who've gone a step further where they're not even going through Amazon anymore, because they built their email list up through the first several books that they've had. And now they're selling directly only through their own website. I mean, I don't know what everybody's experience is with Amazon. I love it when people give actual numbers in the industry, so I can talk about what I know about my relationship with Amazon. Is that I've got a printer, and because I did not want Amazon quality print on demand, that's just a personal thing. I felt like this book was a little bit more upmarket, or literary book club, felt like it needed the right in-hand feel for those environments. And so I chose a printer. Amazon buys my book at about a 55% discount. And so there's list price, but Amazon, it takes a portion of that before I see anything. And so, just kind of thinking about that, just so people are aware, it makes sense why an author would say, hey, I'm going to skip that platform too. But it does mean building up your email list first, making sure that you have your marketing funnels and your machine kind of up and well oiled in order to get out in the world the way that you need to.
Yes, I just discovered Etsy. Authors are putting autographed copies on Etsy. That was the first I saw that this week.
That's such a great idea. I never would have thought of that. That's so smart.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, because I have books with two names. And, if you do an Amazon search, you're only going to get one name. You're only going to get a small portion of what I actually have. But on Etsy, you can put them all together. It's all in one store. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that is something that's kind of difficult. I've got interest in writing other types of books outside of the, kind of literary fiction world. And I've been advised by other people. They say, okay, that's totally fine if you want to write other books, but do it under a pen name, even if it's what's called an open pen name, where, I might go with R.A. Lula or something like that,
Mhm.
because they're like, it's totally okay if people know that it's you, assuming that you want the book associated with your own personal name. But the algorithm, it gets totally confused if you write a nonfiction book and a fiction book under the same author name, and you need to separate those accounts out. Which, yeah, there's a little bit of having to work around those things. But yeah, it is interesting on Etsy. You'd be able, I would imagine the algorithm works differently because they're not trying to, hone people down to, if you like this book, you'll also like this book.
Right, right. And the categories would not even be in Etsy. It would just be into the store. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever parameters you put into, when you make the store. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting ideas. And there's so many more popping up every day. That's what keeps
That's what I love.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so fun about indie publishing, is that, as you can talk, kind of light up when I talk about this, because you get the opportunity to use the same creativity that drove you to write a book in the way that you sell the book. And that's why, like, if that creativity drives you to Instagram or TikTok, that's great. But if that creativity drives you into, it was such an awkward conversation to have with a nonprofit, right? To go and say, hey, you have no idea who I am. I was inspired 7 years ago to write about a version of your organization, a fictitious version of your organization. And I'd like to donate money to you based off of this book. Is that okay? It was a weird conversation. I had to be creative. I had to kind of put my, marketing sales hat on a little bit to go, okay, if I were receiving this conversation, how would I want to hear about this? But, if that's the way that you do it, or if you, who knows, if you want to give a free chocolate chip cookie away with your book, or whatever your thing is, there are as many different ways to sell books as there are books. And I love that about what's happening in the industry right now.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I went on ChatGPT and I put in, who is the target market for my book? Well, they didn't know the name of my book. They didn't know what that was. So then I put in the parameters of the book. It's about a group of women in a meditation group, and there's a stalker, and there's a murder, and who would be the target market for that book? And then it came up with a list of 12 or 15 different groups who would be interested in my book.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Some of them I hadn't even considered before. And then the next question was, where would I find these people? Another long list of places that I could, go to a coffee shop and ask if I can have a book table one afternoon, or all these different places that are getting away from bookstores and away from other writers.
Yeah. 100%. And another tactic that I've been told is that if you once you have your book listed on Amazon, and then soon enough, Amazon will start to list other books that are similar to yours. And so there's a lot of options there, right? Do those authors have podcasts, or what podcasts have those authors been on? Those are places that you can go promote, or make a reel or a TikTok about that. I'm going to do one of these soon for myself, where I'm just going to have copies of books that are similar to mine. I'm going to plop them down and on a bed or on the floor or whatever. And it's going to say, if you like these books, plop, 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 you might like, and then I'll plop mine down, and then link in bio, see what happens. And I might even tag the authors of those books in it too, just so that their audiences see that this might be a book that they'd like. It takes a long time to write a book. These authors don't necessarily care if you're saying, hey, my book is in the same kind of vein as theirs. If they don't have a book coming out tomorrow, you're not a competition for them, because, and not to mention, they're probably huge anyway. But so it kind of keeps their audience engaged, actually, because we should all be working together. Because, if it takes a year, 2 years to write a book, then pretty much a month after mine comes out, 6 months after mine comes out, I'm ready to promote another author, so that while I'm writing my next book, that maybe they'll help me promote mine after theirs comes out, and we can all go together and help each other.
Yes, that's a beautiful idea. I call that an author collaboration group. It's not about writing the book, it's about promoting the book.
Yes.
And I found a friend who has 30 some titles. I have 44. And when we got to know each other and we realized the correlations between our careers, we started to look for other people to join us. And so now when one of us has a launch, the other 4 people in the group will promote the launch. And then the next person will have a launch and we'll all promote that. Can you imagine the combined impact of all those email lists, all those social medias, and other touch points that we have together, as opposed to just one of us alone? So yes, find a friend, find a few friends.
Well, that's what happens on a much bigger level, right? I mean, you see, it's not an accident who shows up on Jimmy Fallon or on any of those shows. There are people who know what circuits they have to hit when they've got something coming out to make the kind of impact that they want to make. But then you also see those more natural affinities where, because of whatever stars in the movie, then some other star is going to say, hey, you should go see my friend's movie. And again, if they don't have a movie coming out the same weekend, it doesn't hurt them at all. If anything, it makes their stock go up, because I wasn't even thinking about XYZ actor today because I was thinking about going to see Barbie or Oppenheimer or whatever. And it's like, it doesn't hurt that person at all. In fact, it helps them to promote their friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Raj, you have a book launch coming out. Let's talk about that.
I do. Yeah. It's coming out March 26th. It's very soon here. And I'm excited to put it out in the world. It's called The Caring House. It is available for pre-order on Amazon. Every dollar of royalties that happen between now for all the pre-order period will be donated to the place that inspired the book, and would be honored, especially if you pick up a hardcover, so that we can make as big of a donation possible to these folks. And yeah, just want to put it out in the world here and see who can come alongside and both get a story that hopefully will change your life, but then also support kids who have lost a loved one.
Yes, indeed. The Caring Place.
The Caring House.
Caring House. The Caring House. You heard it. Go on to Amazon and look it up and get that book. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
My name is Lana McAra. See you next time.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.